Hey gang, it's Mrs. Klein and it's Mrs. Wilburn, but I'm the only one who's going to be recording the podcast today. Just wanted to let you guys know that we are moving into a new lesson, it's lesson 14, entitled Andrew Jackson and the Growth of American Democracy. As always, you guys, there is a guiding question. The guiding question this time around is, how well did President Andrew Jackson promote democracy? In addition to that, there are some key vocabulary terms that you want to make sure that you're familiar with, and they are civil servant, Jacksonian democracy, secede, spoil system, trail of tears, and then also tariff. All right, you guys, I'm starting in the introduction. Here we go. Perhaps the dirtiest campaign in U.S. history was the presidential election of 1828. The two candidates were John Quincy Adams, running for re-election, and Andrew Jackson, the popular hero of the War of 1812's Battle of New Orleans. During the campaign, both sides hurled accusations at each other, a practice called mudslinging. Sometimes these accusations had little to do with an opponent's political beliefs, focusing instead on often exaggerated or untrue personal attacks. Each side hoped that these assaults would undermine their opponent in the eyes of the public. One example of mudslinging between candidates occurred when Jackson supporters called Adams a Sabbath breaker for traveling on a Sunday. He was also accused of using public money to purchase gambling furniture for the White House. In reality, however, Adams had used his own money to buy a chess set and a billiard table. The president's supporters lashed back by calling Jackson a crude and ignorant man who was unfit to be president. They attacked Jackson's parents, rural upbringing, and even brought up old scandals about his relationship with his wife. Jackson's troops called him Old Hickory because he was tough as the hardest wood in all creation. But when he read such lies, he broke down and cried. Despite the trying campaign, when the votes were counted, Jackson was the clear winner. The result was because his supporters came from among the general population, not the rich and upper class. In this lesson, you're going to discover how his presidency was viewed by different groups of people. You'll also learn how Jackson's government affected the growth of democracy in the nation. All right, moving on to section 1, you guys. Andrew Jackson was born in 1767 on the South Carolina frontier. His father died before he was born, leaving his family in poverty. Jackson's childhood ended at the age of 13 after he joined the local militia and was captured by the British during the American Revolution. One day, a British officer ordered Jackson to polish his boots. "Sir," he replied boldly, "I am a prisoner of war and claim or demand to be treated as such." The outraged officer lashed out with his sword, slicing the boy's head and hand, leaving scars that Jackson would carry with him for the rest of his life. After the war, Jackson decided to become a lawyer. He quickly became known as the most roaring, rollicking, game-cocking, horse-racing, card-playing, mischievous fellow in town. Despite his success, Jackson never outgrew his hot temper. Jackson entered politics in Tennessee, serving in both the House and the Senate. However, he did not become widely known until the Battle of New Orleans during the War of 1812, in which his defense of the city made Old Hickory a national hero. In 1824, Jackson ran for president against 3 other candidates, Henry Clay, William Crawford, and John Quincy Adams. Jackson won the most popular votes and the most electoral votes, but he did not have enough electoral votes for a majority. Clay, who had come in 4th, urged his supporters in the House to vote for Adams, and that support gave Adams enough votes to be elected president. In return, Adams chose Clay to be his Secretary of State. And you guys will remember that from the last lesson, Andrew Jackson and his supporters called this a corrupt bargain. They were super upset by it. So Jackson supporters used the time between elections to build a new political organization that came to be called the Democratic Party, the name it still uses today. This new party, they promised, would represent ordinary farmers, workers, and the poor, not the rich and upper class who controlled the Republican Party. In the election of 1828, Jackson's supporters worked hard to reach the nation's voters, and the result was a great victory for Jackson. But it was also a victory for the idea that the common people should control their government. This idea eventually became known as Jacksonian democracy. Moving on to section 2 and the inauguration of Andrew Jackson. On March 4th, 1829, more than 10,000 people who came from every state crowded into Washington, D.C. to witness Andrew Jackson's inauguration. Many of the people flocking into the Capitol were first-time voters. Until the 1820s, only white men with property were thought to have the education and experience to vote wisely, and so the right to vote had excluded many poorer citizens. The new states forming the west of the Appalachians challenged this argument. With the western states leading the way, voting laws were changed to give the common man the right to vote. While this expansion of democracy did not yet include African Americans, American Indians, or women, it did allow over 1 million Americans to vote in 1828, more than 3 times the number who voted in 1824. That's pretty impressive, you guys. Think about that. More than 3 times the people got the opportunity to vote. Many of these new voters did believe that they had rescued the country from disaster. Jackson had promised to throw the rich out and return the government to the people. His election reflected a shift in power to the West and to the farmers, shopkeepers, and small business owners who supported him. All right, finally moving on to Section 3, Jackson's approach to governing. Andrew Jackson approached governing much as he had in leading an army. He listened to others, but then did what he thought was right. Instead of relying only on his cabinet for advice, Jackson made most of his decisions with the help of trusted friends and political supporters. Because these advisors were said to meet with him in the White House kitchen, they were called the kitchen cabinet. The rich men who had been used to influencing the government viewed the kitchen cabinet with deep suspicion because they believed that the men around the president were not the proper sort to be running the country. Jackson's critics were even more upset by his decision to replace many Republican office holders with loyal Democrats. Most of these civil servants viewed their posts as lifetime jobs, but Jackson disagreed. Rotating people in office was more democratic than lifetime service, he said, because it gave more people a chance to serve their government. Jackson's opponents called the practice of rewarding political supporters with government jobs the spoils system. All right, you guys, in this podcast, we learned a little bit about Andrew Jackson and from frontier to the White House. He was a self-made man who rose from poverty to become president of the United States. First-time voters, many of them farmers and frontier settlers, helped elect Jackson in 1828. His supporters celebrated his election as a victory for the common man over the rich and powerful. And we also learned a little bit about his approach to governing. As president, Jackson relied on his kitchen cabinet rather than the official cabinet. He replaced a number of Republican civil servants with Democrats in a practice that became known as the spoils system. All right, you guys, I am out of here. Bye.